In this video, I want to make you familiar with the simplest way of understanding the concept of the look development. I want you at this point, when you create a model, if you want to like change the color or add some sort of shader or texture to it, and like add a light and see it in the render view, I want you to get that knowledge to see how your objects look when you render them. That's it. Don't be confused with the details. So at this point, I mean, I do it like even with the basic sphere, and I do Command D. Basically, I duplicate the sphere, and I have 3 of them. And I create a plane. So I go back to the top view in order to see where I am affecting when I move my object. So I make it bigger. So it's really important to get comfortable working in different perspectives when you do your 3D modeling and see them like from different views. So right now, I do Command D, make another copy, and I go to Channel Box. Create another panel to put it behind this. So right now, and with the Alt B, I can change, with the Alt B, I can change the color of my viewport. I changed the color in order to see it better. So, in Maya, for the look development, there are different aspects of the look development. One is to create a texture. One is to create like a shader, or like shader, basically the material that you create for your object. I mean, 3 of these spheres could get the same material or shader, which is gonna be like a plastic look, but 3 of them can get like different color or relate the color similar to texture. Okay. Also, another aspect of the look development is lighting, that you add the light into your scene. So these are like the main aspect of the look development. When you want to work in that area, it's really important to be familiar with the attribute editor and different panels in the attribute editor. So attribute editor is like all the way on the right side of your software. When I select it, I don't see other option because it said make a selection to view attribute. So basically right now, if I select data sphere, I get these 4 attributes. This is the minimum default attribute that you see, it's built in the software. Okay. But there are other attributes. As you add more functions, components, part to your model, you added different panels or nodes in your attribute editor. Right now, I just created simple shapes without doing anything. That's the reason I get these 4 panels. So if I select on this plane, I still get the same thing. But you see, it's like changing. This one is P plane 2, this one is P plane 1, this one is P sphere, but same concept. All of them have sphere, or like the form of polygon that you created. All of them have the shape panel. All of them have like initial shading group and the shader, which is like the Lambert here, and Lambert is by default shader. All of the objects that you create has a default shader, which is Lambert, and you never want to change this one. all of them you can see like they have Lambert 1. All of them you get like same name, same panel, it's Lambert 1. Any object that you create before you add any specific shader. So this is the one that is by default, and you don't want to touch this one. You create your own shaders, texture. So everything you can see is like in this outliner. For example, these two planes, I'm gonna create a group out of it and I name it like backdrop, whatever. And I have 3 sphere. I make it, you're supposed to change the name. I make it like, you should put something instead of number. I put it like sphere 1, and I change the order, set like 1, 2, 3. So it's really important to have an organized outliner, which I have it right now. I told you before, any component or like any anything that you added in Maya, it's gonna be in your outliner too. It's like similar to your light too. So if I want to add a texture, at this point I'm gonna go to rendering, and as you can see under the rendering panel in the shelf, there are some lights and some material too. As you hover over your mouse, you will see it says, for example, this one is Blinn material, this one is Lambert. So Blinn is more shiny, Lambert is more matte shader. So we will talk about this later. I don't want you to be confused with how each of them work. Just like play around and see how they look. That is for now at this point. And also light, you can see there are different lights. Also, you can go to the create, and also if you want to assign a material to an object, one was to do it from the shelf, the other one was from the marquee menu, which I told you earlier. Right click and it has the option assign new material, so you can select that one and it tells you which material you want to do that. So Maya by default has these options that you can see them here, so don't worry about from this way as we just play around with the shelf. I need to select my object first and then choose the material. I am gonna like choose the Lambert, and when I add it, it creates that node or panel in the attribute editor for me, and it's called Lambert tree. I'm gonna rename it for sure. This is the material that I do it for the sphere 1. So I'm gonna make it sphere 1 material. Then later, if I want to look for it, I can find it easily, okay? So the color, basic thing, I'm gonna double click on the color, just the color itself, like the gray color, and choose one of the different colors. I do it like from these main colors. So now if I click on the sphere, as you can see, I see the sphere 1. I see the shape, I see the polysphere 1, which is like the subdivisions. Like if you want to add subdivision, you can add it from here, and you can see another node, it's called sphere 1 material, which is the one that I created and I renamed it. So same thing for the second and third one. For this one, for example, I do the Blinn, but I rename it and I make it sphere to material. Then you can see the difference between materials. You see how this one is matte, this one is like more shiny, and for this one I select it and I make it fine because like more plastic look, and I make it sphere 3 material. So fine and Wayne so similar, but definitely when you play around with the attributes options and each of them, you will get different results. For example, it has the transparency, it has the ambient, um, like the specular. Don't worry about this option at this point, but for example, I play around with the transparency at this point and you see the difference. I'm gonna add material for my backdrop too. I will add the Lambert, and I select both of them and added this material, and I change the color and make it, for example, this whitish gray. So basically these are the very first look development that I did. I added the shader, which is the material, and I also add some color to my shader. And at this point, I can render them. For the render, you will see this area icons that it is dedicated to render, which is like the first one, it says like open render view. The second one is render the current frame. Third one, IPR render the current frame, but it is for the Arnold render, which we'll talk about it later, and your render setting. So at this point, I want you to know there are different render engines that Maya uses in order to render something. In order to see it, I will click on the setting here, render setting here, and under the render setting, it says render using Arnold render here. These are the engines. So if I click and open up that menu, you see it has the Maya software, Maya hardware, RenderMan, Maya Vector, and Arnold render. When you download Maya, by default it has the option to add the plugin for the Arnold render, and hopefully you download everything with Maya the time that you download it, and you will see the Arnold render when you click on your render setting, which is like one of the engines comes with Maya. And it's a higher quality engine that we are gonna use. It's like one of the engines that we use for our render. The other one is RenderMan, which is the one that I manually added from the RenderMan website. This is like an external render engine that I added to Maya, and you don't have it at this point. You only see the software, hardware, vector, and Arnold. But RenderMan is totally external engine that we are using it for the look development because this is really user friendly and this is easy to use. And another advantage to compare to Arnold render is that it doesn't take that much RAM of your computer and it's faster for rendering. It is not way faster, don't be surprised, it still takes time to render your frames, but it is faster than Arnold. RenderMan has some presets for the rendering, has like good texture and shader, and you don't need to be confused with making your material in Arnold. Arnold doesn't have that preset. It means any material that you add, you need to play around with the attributes in order to make it look good in a way that you want. For example, if you want to have something with the glass material or look, you need to play around with your Arnold standard surface material and work with different options in the attribute in order to make it look like a glass. So in this class, we are going to talk about the Arnold and the RenderMan. So at this point, let's choose the Arnold render as the engine to render our frame or our scene. And don't worry about other options. We will talk about them later. The most important thing is that to choose the right engine for the render, and it's based on your purpose. At this point, we are going to use the Arnold. So I close it. One more time, if you want to choose your right and render engine, just you need to select the render setting icon and go and choose the one that you need. At this point is Arnold render. And the IPR is the one that render your frame in Arnold. So we are going to choose the IPR. And as you can see, it's black. It doesn't mean that we don't have our objects. We still have our objects, but the scene is black because there is no light in the scene. In order to create light, go back to the rendering and there are lights, and let's create an area light, which is the fifth one from the left, or any other light. You can play around and see it. I can change the scale of the light, the direction by the rotation function, and you see that like the light, my light has some sort of point, this one, as you can see it, and it's really important to be toward the direction of this point needs to be toward my object in order to illuminate them. And as you can see, my light added in the timeline, in the outliner as well. So I make the scale bigger. And probably I need to change the intensity, the like basic attribute here, because intensity is 1 and I don't think it illuminates that much, but let's test it. So I click on the IPR. So it's still dark. It means basically it doesn't illuminate. One good thing about the Arnold render is that you can leave the render view open and do your work in your timeline, and it's real time, it renders it. So I select my light again and I increase the intensity. As you can see here, something is illuminating. So I will make the intensity 200. You see, it's like a big number, but that was the only way to illuminate my object. So I even make it 400. And I can zoom in the scene in order to see my objects better. So you can see how the materials are different. This is the render that you get for Lambert, and these were like more shiny look in the Blaine and Font. So now you're able to see your render. In order to save your render, you can go to the file, save image, but one important thing is that go and by default, I think it is under raw. Let me reset the tool. Yeah, when I reset it, you see like it's under raw image, and when you save it, the one that you can see in your saved file, the color, everything is different than what you see in your render, because the IPR render view basically makes some sort of color correction for you. And if you save it as a raw image, you won't get the same result. So choose the color manage image, which is similar to what you see in here. I apply, and now I go and save image. Basically by default, because I set my project, it is like under desktop Maya modeling image folder. That's the reason I told you to set your project, which is like a good path for it. I'm gonna rename it to render one, save it, and I chose the JPEG format. And in the folder that I have on my desktop, as you remember, it was under the image, which is here. And if I click, I see exactly the same thing that I see in my render view. So as you can see, my render view has really similar results and like with the image that I saved it. Any light that you created, it will create it in the outliner, and you see it. It says the area light. You can even, I select this one, even with Control D, I can duplicate it. You see it create the second area light for me in the timeline. I can, in the outliner, I can change the size, the rotation, different attributes of the light, change the color, change the intensity. For example, here I change the color to yellow, render it. You can see I have like the white from right and from the left and yellow from the right. So at this point, I want you to have RenderMan engine downloaded and install it as a plugin to your Maya. What you need to do, go to Google and search for RenderMan, and this is the first link that you get, and it's like part of the Pixar company, so you get the Pixar RenderMan. Click on that one, and it has a try or buy option. So get it, try it for the non-commercial for free, and I will also share a video tutorial for you that it shows you how to download RenderMan and how to install it on your computer and add it as a plugin to Maya. I want you to get it and take a look at the tutorial, which is a good tutorial to learn how to work in RenderMan, and just start playing with RenderMan. Now you have the understanding of the concept of look development, which it means adding a light, adding a shader as a material. So RenderMan has some built-in shaders that you can play with them and see how they look. So just like, yeah, start it and have fun with it. This point specifically for the first project, I don't want you to get really confused with the details of creating shaders and the texture and material. I want you to have some understanding of the fundamental and the basic way to apply material to your models.